Taehyun Kim rubbed his tired eyes and leaned back from the microscope. The lab was quiet at this late hour, just how he liked it. 3 years of research, and these Nocturnian cell samples still defied explanation. Under Earth normal light and atmosphere, they remained stubbornly inert. "Not again," he muttered, making another note in his digital log. His superiors at the Galactic Alliance Research Division were growing impatient. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 2 decades, and Taehyun felt the pressure to prove human scientists could contribute valuable research. The cells floated in their nutrient bath, mysterious and uncooperative. Taehyun checked the temperature and light readings for the 5th time that night. Everything was perfect, yet nothing happened. "You're looking at it wrong," came a melodic voice from behind him. Taehyun nearly jumped out of his chair. He thought he was alone in the lab at this hour. He turned to find a tall figure standing in the doorway. She stepped into the soft blue light of the lab. Taehyun's breath caught in his throat. He recognized her as a Nocturnian, one of the most enigmatic species in the Alliance. Her skin had a silvery sheen that seemed to absorb and reflect the light in equal measure. Intricate markings traced along her temples, pulsing gently with a light of their own. "I'm Era," she said, moving toward his workstation with fluid grace. "The new liaison from Nocturna Prime. I was told you're studying our cellular biology." Taehyun managed to find his voice. "Yes, I'm Taehyun Kim. I've been working on understanding how Nocturnian cells process energy, but they don't seem to do anything under standard conditions." Era's lips curved into a small smile. "That's because Nocturnians evolved in darkness. Our biology responds differently." Without asking permission, she reached past him and adjusted the lab controls. The lights dimmed until the room was nearly black. "Wait, I can't see," Taehyun began. "Look," Era whispered. In the darkness, the previously dormant cells had come alive. They glowed with intricate patterns of blue and purple light, pulsing in complex rhythms. Taehyun stared in wonder as they began to form connections with each other, building delicate structures that shimmered like tiny constellations. "They're photosensitive, but inversely so," Era explained. "Light suppresses their natural processes. In darkness, they reveal their true nature." Taehyun couldn't tear his eyes away from the sample. "It's beautiful," he said softly. 3 years of research, and I never thought to simply turn off the lights." "Sometimes we need an outside perspective," Era said, her voice warm with amusement. "Not all species experience the universe the same way." That first meeting changed everything for Taehyun. The next day, he requested Era's assistance on his project, which his supervisor eagerly approved. Nocturnians rarely offered to collaborate with other species, especially humans. Over the following weeks, Taehyun learned that Nocturnians had developed a sophisticated civilization in the shadows of their twilight world. They perceived emotions as energy patterns, which had led to many misunderstandings with other species. "Your people call us Succubus sometimes," Era mentioned one day as they worked. "It's an old Earth legend, isn't it?" Taehyun felt his face grow hot. "Some humans have misconceptions about Nocturnians. They think your species feeds on emotions or life energy." Era tilted her head. "An interesting theory, though not accurate. We do sense emotions, but we don't consume them." Her markings pulsed with a purple light. "Is that why many of your colleagues avoid me?" "Probably," Taehyun admitted. "Humans fear what they don't understand." Their research sessions extended into coffee breaks in the facility's cafeteria. Era was fascinated by Earth beverages, especially tea. She would hold each new cup close to her face, inhaling deeply before tasting. "Your world has such varied plant life," she said. "Nocturna Prime has fewer species, but each serves multiple purposes." Taehyun found himself sharing more about Earth, his childhood in New Seoul, and his dreams of exploring the galaxy. Era spoke of the floating crystal cities of her homeworld and the ancient traditions her people maintained. Their research progressed rapidly. Together, they discovered that Nocturnian cells could repair damaged human tissue at remarkable speeds when properly stimulated. The implications for medicine were significant, and their paper earned recognition across the Alliance. 4 months into their collaboration, Taehyun realized something had changed. He found himself looking for Era each morning when he arrived at the lab. Their hands would occasionally touch as they worked, sending an unexpected warmth through him. He caught himself studying her face when she was focused on their experiments, admiring the way her markings shifted with her thoughts. "You're staring again," Era said without looking up from her microscope. "Sorry," Taehyun replied, embarrassed at being caught. "I was thinking about the cellular regeneration rates." "Were you?" Her markings flashed with a color he hadn't seen before. "Your emotional pattern suggests otherwise." Taehyun had forgotten she could sense his emotions. "Is that uncomfortable for you?" Era finally looked up at him, her silver eyes holding his gaze. "No. It's unexpected, but not unwelcome." Their first date was in the botanical gardens of the research facility. Era was drawn to the night-blooming flowers, which reminded her of home. Their first kiss happened there, under the light of Earth's moon, her skin cool against his. 2 months later, as they sat in Taehyun's apartment watching the stars from his window, Era turned to him with unusual seriousness. "The festival of bonding approaches on Nocturna Prime," she said. "It happens once every 7 Earth years. I would like you to accompany me." Taehyun felt both honored and nervous. "To meet your family?" "Yes." Her markings pulsed rapidly. "It is significant in my culture." The next day, when Taehyun mentioned his upcoming trip to colleagues, their reactions ranged from concern to outright alarm. "You're going to Nocturna Prime with her?" his friend Minho asked. "Haven't you heard the stories about what happens to humans who get involved with Nocturnians?" "Those are just rumors," Taehyun insisted. "All I'm saying is, nobody really knows what happens on their homeworld," Minho warned. "People say the whole Succubus thing isn't just a legend. They say Nocturnians bring other species home to feed." Taehyun dismissed the warnings, but a seed of doubt had been planted. That night, he researched everything available about Nocturna Prime and its customs. The information was sparse, as few non-Nocturnians had visited and returned to share their experiences. When Era asked him for his answer about the festival, he looked into her silver eyes and found he couldn't say no despite the warnings. Whatever waited for him on Nocturna Prime, his feelings for her were real. "I'll go with you," he said. Her markings glowed with the brightest light he had ever seen from her. "You've made me very happy," she said, embracing him. "My family will be surprised, but I think they'll like you." As their departure date approached, Taehyun couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. What was he really walking into? What hadn't Era told him about her world or her people? Despite his doubts, he packed his bags. Whatever came next, he'd face it for her. The sleek interstellar transport ship hummed quietly as it cut through the darkness of space. Taehyun sat beside Era in the passenger cabin, watching stars streak past the viewport. They had been traveling for 3 days since leaving Earth's solar system. "How much longer?" Taehyun asked, trying to mask his nervousness. "We'll reach Nocturna Prime in about 6 hours, Era replied. Her silver skin seemed to glow more vibrantly the closer they got to her homeworld. The markings along her temples pulsed with excitement. Taehyun nodded and went back to reviewing his notes on Nocturnian customs. He had spent weeks preparing for this trip, learning what little information was available about Era's mysterious people. Most of it came directly from Era, as the Galactic Alliance database contained surprisingly little about Nocturnian culture. "You seem worried," Era said, placing her cool hand over his. "Just nervous about meeting your family," Taehyun admitted. "I want to make a good impression." Era's markings flashed a soft blue. "My family is traditional," she explained, choosing her words carefully. "But they'll accept you once they know you." "Traditional how?" Taehyun asked. Era considered her answer. "They value our ancient ways. My mother especially believes in preserving Nocturnian culture as it has been for thousands of years. And bringing home a human boyfriend doesn't fit into those traditions, I'm guessing. Era's markings pulsed purple with amusement. You would be the first human to attend the Festival of Bonding, yes. The ship's captain announced they were beginning their approach to the Nocturna system. Tae-yun felt his heart rate increase. He had traveled to 3 other planets since joining the research division, but never to a world as secretive as Nocturna Prime. Hours later, the transport broke through the cloud layer of Era's homeworld. Tae-yun pressed his face against the viewport, his eyes widening at the sight below. The surface of Nocturna Prime was nothing like he had imagined. The planet was in a perpetual state of twilight, orbiting a dim red star at just the right distance to create an eternal dusk. But despite the low light, the world below glowed with vibrant life. Vast forests stretched across the dark landscape, every tree pulsing with bioluminescence in shades of blue, purple, and green. The patterns weren't random. They moved in waves, as if the entire forest was communicating through light. Those are the sacred groves, Era said, pointing to particularly bright clusters. The oldest living things on our world. Some have been growing for over 50,000 years. Above these glowing forests floated what appeared to be cities made of crystal. Massive structures hung suspended in the air, connected by bridges of light. They shimmered with inner radiance, catching and amplifying the bioluminescence from below. How do they stay up? Tae-yun asked in wonder. Gravitational manipulation, Era explained. My ancestors learned to control local gravity fields long before they developed space travel. The transport banked toward the southern continent, revealing even more marvels. Sprawling temple complexes dotted the landscape, their spires reaching toward the dark sky. Each one glowed with a different color, creating a constellation of light across the surface. As they descended lower, Tae-yun noticed that the ship was approaching the largest structure he had seen yet, an enormous palace that dominated the southern landscape. It was built into the side of a mountain, with countless towers and spires extending outward. Unlike the floating cities, this structure was firmly anchored to the ground, projecting power and permanence. You didn't mention your family lived in a palace, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the ship's engines. Era touched his hand gently. Her skin was cooler than usual, a sign of nervousness that Tae-yun had learned to recognize. There are many things I haven't mentioned, Tae-yun, but you'll understand soon. The transport settled onto a landing platform extending from one of the palace's lower levels. As the engines powered down, Tae-yun saw figures gathering to meet them. Tall, silver-skinned beings with elaborate markings covering more of their bodies than Era's did. Is that your family? He asked, suddenly feeling underdressed in his Galactic Alliance formal wear. Some of them, Era replied. Those are my cousins and younger siblings. Tae-yun took a deep breath. You have a lot of siblings. 23. Era said casually, as if this was perfectly normal. Before Tae-yun could process this information, the ship's door slid open. The air that rushed in was cool and sweet, with unfamiliar scents that reminded him of rain and spices. Era stood and offered her hand. Ready? Tae-yun nodded and took her hand, finding strength in her touch. Together, they walked down the ramp toward the waiting Nocturnians. As they approached, Tae-yun noticed something unusual. Each Nocturnian's markings glowed with different patterns and intensities. Some had markings that extended across their faces in complex designs, while others had simpler patterns like Era's. A young female stepped forward. Her markings were similar to Era's but glowed with a greener tint. Sister, she said, embracing Era. Welcome home. Jia, Era replied warmly. This is Tae-yun Kim, from Earth. Jia studied Tae-yun with curious eyes. The human scientist. You're shorter than I expected. Tae-yun bowed slightly, remembering his cultural training. It's an honor to meet Era's family. The other Nocturnians moved forward, each introducing themselves with names Taehyun struggled to pronounce. They touched their foreheads to his in the traditional Nocturnian greeting, their markings flashing in patterns he couldn't interpret. After the introductions, Jia led them into the palace. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Vast halls with ceilings that seemed to capture starlight, walls that glowed with shifting patterns, and furniture made from materials Taehyun had never seen before. "Your home is beautiful," he said to Ara. "This is just the outer residence," she replied. "The main family quarters are deeper inside." As they walked, Taehyun noticed servants moving silently through the halls. They wore simple clothing with minimal markings, bowing deeply as Ara passed. He leaned closer to her. "You didn't tell me your family had servants." Ara's markings flashed briefly with discomfort. "There's a complex social structure on Nocturna Prime. Those with stronger emotional perception typically serve in leadership roles. And your family has very strong perception," Taehyun guessed. "The strongest," Jia answered from ahead, her hearing apparently better than Taehyun had realized. "Our mother can sense emotions from across the continent." Taehyun swallowed hard. "That's impressive." They continued deeper into the palace, passing through security checkpoints where guards with stern expressions and elaborate armor stood watch. Each guard bowed deeply to Ara, their markings flashing in what Taehyun recognized as patterns of respect. "The festival begins tomorrow," Jia explained as they reached a grand suite of rooms. "Tonight, you'll rest and prepare. Mother wishes to meet the human privately before presenting him to the extended family." The way she said the human made Taehyun feel like a specimen rather than a guest, but he kept his expression neutral. Ara had warned him that her people could be formal with outsiders. After Jia left, Taehyun turned to Ara in their private quarters. "Your sister called your mother Mother with a capital M." I could hear it in her voice. Ara's markings pulsed slowly, a sign she was choosing her words carefully. "My mother holds an important position in our society." "How important?" "She leads the Southern Hemisphere Council," Ara said, looking away, "and sits on a high planetary council." Taehyun sat down on the edge of a floating platform that served as a bed. "So your mother is basically the equivalent of a planetary governor or president." "Something like that," Ara agreed, though her markings flashed in a pattern Taehyun had never seen before. "Rest now. Tomorrow will be challenging." As Ara moved to prepare for sleep, Taehyun stood and walked to the window. Outside, the eternal twilight of Nocturna Prime cast the landscape in purple shadows. The forests pulsed with light, and the floating cities twinkled like earthbound stars. What had he gotten himself into? And what else wasn't Ara telling him? Taehyun woke to the sound of soft chimes. He opened his eyes to the unfamiliar ceiling of their guest chamber in the palace. The perpetual twilight of Nocturna Prime made it impossible to tell the time without checking the Galactic standard chronometer on his wrist. 7:30 hours. Ara stood by the large window, already dressed in formal attire. Her usual simple clothing had been replaced by flowing robes in deep purple, with silver threads that seemed to move on their own. The markings on her temples were enhanced with some kind of luminescent paint, making them glow more brightly than usual. "Good morning," Taehyun said, sitting up. "Or is it evening? Hard to tell here." Ara turned, and Taehyun was struck by how different she looked. On Earth, she had always dressed to blend in. Here, in her formal robes with her markings proudly displayed, she seemed like a different person. "It's morning by our reckoning," she said. "We track time by the pulse of the sacred groves, not by sunlight. You should prepare. My mother has requested an audience before the festival begins." Taehyun found clothes laid out for him. Not his Earth formal wear, but garments similar to what he'd seen other Nocturnians wearing, adapted for human physiology. The fabric felt strange against his skin, cool and somehow responsive to his body temperature. "These fit perfectly," he said, surprised. "They were made for you," Ara replied. "I sent your measurements ahead." A soft knock at the door announced Jia, Ara's sister. She entered with a small contingent of servants who brought breakfast, strange fruits, and what looked like bread but glowed faintly. "The food is safe for human consumption," Jia assured him, noticing his hesitation. "We've studied your biology." After they ate, Jia led them through the palace's winding corridors. Other Nocturnians they passed stopped to stare at Taehyun, their markings pulsing with what he guessed was curiosity or surprise. Some bowed to Era with unusual deference. "Why do they bow so deeply to you?" Taehyun whispered. "Later," Era replied, her voice tense. They reached a massive set of doors carved from what appeared to be a single piece of luminescent stone. Guards stood at attention, their armor more elaborate than those Taehyun had seen the previous day. "The Grand Hall of Meeting," Jia announced formally. "The matriarch awaits." The doors swung open silently despite their apparent weight. Taehyun stepped into a vast chamber that took his breath away. The ceiling soared impossibly high, decorated with what looked like a map of the galaxy rendered in living light. The floor was polished stone that reflected the soft glow from wall sconces shaped like twisted vines. At the far end of the hall stood a raised platform with a single seat, not quite a throne, but conveying the same authority. Around the perimeter of the room stood dozens of Nocturnians, all wearing formal attire with varying degrees of elaboration. Taehyun noticed their markings seemed to correspond to their clothing. The more complex the markings, the more ornate the robes. And there, standing before the seat of honor, was a tall female Nocturnian. Her robes made Era's look simple by comparison. Layers of deep blue and purple fabric embedded with what must have been precious gems that caught and amplified the room's light. Upon her head sat a crown-like structure of twisted silver that extended into her markings, which covered not just her temples but her entire face in intricate patterns. Matriarch Neri stood like a statue as they entered the grand hall. Her ceremonial robes and elaborate crown marked her as someone of great importance. Her face betrayed no emotion, but her markings pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm that somehow conveyed power. The room fell silent as Era led Taehyun down the central aisle. He could feel the weight of every gaze, the judgment in every pair of silver eyes. At the foot of the platform, Era bowed deeply, lowering her head almost to the floor. Taehyun quickly followed suit, though less gracefully. "Mother," Era said, her voice carrying in the perfect acoustics of the hall. "I present Taehyun Kim of Earth." Taehyun kept his head bowed, heart pounding. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes. "Rise," came a voice that seemed to resonate not just in the air, but somehow within Taehyun's mind as well. It carried authority and age beyond what he had expected. He straightened to find the matriarch studying him with unnerving intensity. Her eyes were unlike any Nocturnians he had seen. Not silver, but a deep, shifting violet that seemed to look through him rather than at him. "So this is your chosen?" Nari's voice echoed with authority. "The human who thinks himself worthy of joining our bloodline." The gathered family members, dozens of Nocturnians with varying degrees of the same regal bearing as Era, watched him with calculating eyes. Their markings pulsed in patterns that seemed to communicate among themselves. Taehyun felt his mouth go dry. Bloodline. Joining? Era had described the Festival of Bonding as an important cultural event, but she'd never mentioned anything about joining a bloodline. "Matriarch Neri," Taehyun said, remembering the formal address Era had taught him. "I am honored by your welcome." A ripple of what might have been surprise passed through the watching Nocturnians. Their markings flashed rapidly. "He speaks our language," one whispered. "Era taught him," another replied. Neri descended from her platform with fluid grace that belied her apparent age. Up close, Taehyun could see subtle differences between her and the younger Nocturnians. Her skin had a pearlescent quality, and tiny lines radiated from her eyes like silver threads. She circled Taehyun slowly, examining him from all angles. "Humans are physically unimpressive," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "But they have proven adaptable. This one has mastered basic communication." Taehyun fought to keep his expression neutral. He was a respected xenobiologist, not some primitive specimen to be evaluated. "Mother," Era said, a note of tension in her voice. "Taehyun is a scientist of considerable accomplishment. Our research together has advanced Nocturnian medicine." "Yes," Nari agreed. "I have reviewed your findings. Impressive. For such a young species." She completed her circle and stood directly before Taehyun. "Tell me, human, why have you come to our world? What do you seek from my daughter?" The directness of the question caught Taehyun off guard. He glanced at Ara, whose markings pulsed with encouragement. "I came because Era invited me," he said simply, "and because I care for her deeply." Nari's markings flashed in a complex pattern. "Interesting. You speak of personal attachment, not advantage or alliance." She turned to the assembled family. "Leave us. I will speak with the human and my daughter alone." The gathered Nocturnians filed out silently, though many cast curious glances back at Taehyun. Only a few remained. Jia, two older Nocturnians who might have been advisors, and a younger female who stayed near the door. When the hall was mostly empty, Nari's demeanor shifted subtly. Her markings changed to a softer pattern, and she gestured to a side chamber. "Come, we will speak more comfortably." The smaller room contained low seating arranged in a circle. Nari took the largest seat, while Era guided Taehyun to sit beside her. "Era," Taehyun whispered urgently, "why did your mother call herself matriarch?" Before Era could answer, a voice came from behind them. The younger female who had remained in the grand hall had followed them in, and now stood just inside the doorway. "Because she rules the southern hemisphere," Era's younger sister Duri whispered, though not quietly enough. "And Era is her heir." Nari's markings flashed sharply. "Duri, mind your place." "He should know, mother," Duri replied, unrepentant. "If he's to undergo the trials, he deserves to know what family he's joining." Taehyun turned to Era, stunned. "You're the heir to half a planet." Era looked uncomfortable for the first time since they'd arrived. "I was going to explain." "When?" Taehyun asked. "After the trials your sister just mentioned." Nari made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Your chosen has spirit, Era. Good. He will need it." She leaned forward, her violet eyes fixed on Taehyun. "Yes, human. My daughter is heir to the southern hemisphere of Nocturna Prime. Our bloodline has ruled here for 20 generations. And yes, there are trials for any who wish to join our family through bonding. Did you think we would simply welcome an alien into our house without testing?" Taehyun felt anger rising. "I thought I was invited to a cultural festival, not a royal evaluation." "The festival of bonding is both," Nari said. "For common Nocturnians, it is merely celebration. For the ruling bloodlines, it is when we form alliances and strengthen our houses." She sat back, studying him. "My daughter believes you worthy of consideration. That alone grants you the right to attempt the trials. Few outsiders receive such an honor." Taehyun looked at Ara, who at least had the grace to appear apologetic. "You might have mentioned this. Would you have come if I had?" she asked softly. Taehyun sat alone in his chambers, still processing the shocking revelations about Era's family. He had come to Nocturna Prime expecting to meet his girlfriend's parents, not to discover she was royalty. And certainly not to face ancient trials to prove his worth. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. The door slid open to reveal Duri, Era's younger sister. Unlike the formal attire she'd worn earlier, she now dressed in simpler clothes that reminded Taehyun of training gear. "May I enter?" she asked, her markings pulsing with curiosity. Taehyun nodded. "Where's Era?" "Meeting with Mother and the council. They're discussing your trials." Duri moved to sit across from him. "She wanted to be here, but tradition forbids assistance from the one who brought you." "The trials are ancient tradition," explained Duri as she helped Taehyun prepare. "Any outsider seeking to join a high family must prove their worth." And if I refuse? Taehyun asked. Duri's markings pulsed with surprise. You would be sent home, and all ties with Ara would be severed. Our family cannot have connections to those unwilling to prove themselves. Taehyun sighed. Tell me about these trials. 3 tests: mind, body, and soul, Duri said, opening a small container. Inside were simple garments and a pendant made of glowing crystal. You'll face each alone. She helped him change into the light, flexible clothing that would allow him to move freely. The pendant, she explained, would monitor his life signs during the trials. Will any of these kill me? Taehyun asked bluntly. Duri's markings flashed with what might have been amusement. Not intentionally. But there is risk. The trials test limits. A chime sounded, deep and resonant. Duri stood. It's time. She led him through dark corridors to a section of the palace he hadn't seen before. The architecture here was older, the walls carved with ancient symbols that glowed faintly. They descended several levels until they reached a circular chamber. Ara waited there with her mother and several elder Nocturnians. Ara's face showed concern, but she remained silent as tradition required. Taehyun Kim of Earth, Matriarch Nari's voice echoed in the chamber. You faced the 3 trials of worth. Success brings acceptance into our bloodline. Failure means departure. She gestured to an archway that shimmered with energy. The mind trial awaits. Enter when ready. Taehyun looked at Ara one last time, then stepped through the archway. The world around him shifted. He found himself in what appeared to be a maze, its walls made of some transparent material that reflected light in disorienting ways. As he took his first steps, the walls shifted, changing configuration. A voice, not quite sound but more like a thought placed directly in his mind, spoke. Find the center. But beware, the path responds to your fears. Taehyun moved cautiously forward. The maze seemed simple at first, but soon he noticed something strange. Whenever he felt confident about a direction, the path would stretch endlessly. When he doubted himself, the walls closed in. It's responding to my emotions, he realized. Testing his theory, Taehyun deliberately focused on his fear of enclosed spaces. Immediately, the corridor narrowed. When he thought about his fear of heights, the floor became transparent, revealing a bottomless drop below. Understanding dawned. The maze wasn't testing his ability to navigate physically, but mentally, to control his fears rather than be controlled by them. Hours passed as Taehyun learned to master his emotional responses. When he feared being lost, he forced himself to trust his instincts. When he worried about time running out, he made himself slow down and observe carefully. Finally, he reached the center, a small circular room with a single crystal floating in the middle. As he touched it, the maze dissolved around him, and he found himself back in the circular chamber. The elders nodded with approval. Matriarch Neri stepped forward. The mind trial is complete. Rest now. The body trial begins at the next cycle. Duri led an exhausted Taehyun back to his chambers. You did well, she said. Many take days to complete the mind trial. Days. Taehyun collapsed onto his bed. How long was I in there? 6 hours, Duri replied. The fastest completion by an outsider in my memory. Taehyun slept deeply, waking to find new clothes waiting, these more sturdy and weatherproof. Duri arrived to escort him to the next trial. The body trial tests physical resilience, she explained as they walked to a platform outside the palace. It's different for each candidate based on their species' capabilities. This time, a small group of Nocturnians had gathered to watch. Era stood with her mother, her face carefully neutral despite the worry evident in her markings. Taehyun Kim, Matriarch Neri announced. The wilds of Nocturna Prime will test your body's strength and adaptability. You must survive for 1 full cycle and return with the bloom of a night flower. A transport hummed nearby. Taehyun was given a small pack with basic tools, a knife, water purifier, and simple medical supplies. No food, No communication device, no map. The transport took him far from the palace, deep into the bioluminescent forests. When it departed, Taehyun stood alone in the alien wilderness, surrounded by strange sounds and shifting lights. Right, he muttered to himself. Survive and find a flower. How hard can it be? Very hard, as it turned out. The forest was beautiful but deadly. Plants that seemed harmless would suddenly release toxins when approached. Small creatures watched from the shadows, some curious, others clearly predatory. Taehyun relied on his xenobiology training, carefully observing before interacting with anything. He found water by following the patterns of light in the trees. Brighter clusters indicated water sources, he discovered. Food proved more challenging. After careful testing, he identified several fruits that didn't trigger his toxin detector, but he still ate sparingly, unsure of long-term effects. The night flower, his required prize, was equally difficult to locate. He eventually found a clearing where patches of soil glowed with a different pattern than the surrounding forest. There, delicate flowers bloomed, their petals absorbing rather than emitting light, dark spots in the luminescent landscape. As he reached for one, the ground beneath him collapsed. Taehyun found himself trapped in a pit, its walls too smooth to climb. Above, creatures gathered at the edge, their eyes glowing as they watched their trapped prey. Using the tools in his pack and branches that had fallen with him, Taehyun constructed a simple climbing device. Hours of effort later, he pulled himself free, clutching his precious flower. When the transport returned to collect him, Taehyun was dirty, scratched, and exhausted, but alive and successful. The Nocturnians seemed impressed by his return. 2 trials complete, Nari acknowledged as he presented the night flower. The final test awaits. After recovery and rest, Taehyun faced the soul trial. Unlike the previous challenges, this one took place in the grand hall before the entire family. Hundreds of Nocturnians gathered to watch. The soul trial is one of truth, Matriarch Neri explained. You must reveal your deepest understanding, something true that you have learned about our people, something that demonstrates your worthiness to join our bloodline. Taehyun stood in the center of the hall, all eyes upon him. He had expected physical challenges, tests of intellect. But this, how could he, an outsider, presume to understand Nocturnian culture deeply enough to satisfy them? He looked at Ara, whose markings pulsed with encouragement despite her neutral expression. Then he thought about their months together, the research they had shared, and the misconceptions humans held about her people. Taking a deep breath, Taehyun began to speak. When I first heard of Nocturnians, humans called your people Succubus, emotional predators who fed on feelings, he said, his voice steady. My scientific mind rejected such superstition, but I still approached our research looking for biological mechanisms that might explain the myth. The hall was utterly silent, every marking pulsing with attention. What I found instead was something far more complex. Nocturnians don't feed on emotions. You experience them more deeply than humans can imagine. Your ability to sense feelings isn't predatory. It's a profound form of understanding that humans lack. Taehyun turned slowly, addressing the entire assembly. I came to believe that Nocturnians aren't the emotional predators humans feared, but beings who evolved a different relationship with feelings. One where emotions are not just internal experiences, but shared energies. You don't take emotions from others. You resonate with them, amplify them, and sometimes help transform them. He faced Matriarch Nari directly. My deepest truth is this. Humans fear Nocturnians because we can't imagine experiencing emotions so completely, so honestly. We hide our feelings. You embrace them. We see them as weakness. You recognize them as power. The hall remained silent for several long moments after he finished. Then, one by one, the markings of the assembled Nocturnians began to pulse in unison, a synchronized pattern that filled the room with light. Matriarch Neri stepped forward, her own markings glowing brighter than Taehyun had ever seen. "The human speaks truth," she said, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "He has seen what few outsiders ever perceive. The soul trial is complete." She turned to face the assembly. "Taehyun Kim of Earth has passed the 3 trials. Does any family member challenge his worth?" The silence was answer enough. Nari turned back to Taehyun. "Welcome, Taehyun Kim," she said formally. "You have earned your place." Era finally broke protocol, rushing forward to embrace him, her markings pulsing with joy and relief. Around them, the Nocturnian family began to celebrate the successful completion of the trials. The festival of bonding began at twilight. The palace and surrounding grounds transformed with additional lights and decorations. Floating lanterns drifted through the air, their soft glow reflecting off the crystalline structures. Nocturnians from across the planet arrived in ceremonial attire, their markings enhanced with luminescent paints that made them glow even more brightly than usual. Taehyun watched from a balcony overlooking the main courtyard, still processing his success in the 3 trials. A servant had provided him with formal clothing for the occasion, robes similar to those worn by the Nocturnian royal family, but modified slightly to acknowledge his human origins. "Overwhelmed," came Duri's voice from behind him. Taehyun turned to find Era's younger sister approaching, her own formal attire sparkling with tiny crystals that caught the light. "A little," he admitted. "Yesterday I was just a xenobiologist from Earth. Today I'm about to be formally bonded to the hair of the Southern Hemisphere." Duri's markings pulsed with amusement. "And to think you almost walked away when you discovered the truth." "I considered it," Taehyun said honestly. "It felt like Era had hidden too much from me. She feared you would reject her if you knew her position," Duri said, joining him at the railing. "Humans have strange ideas about equality and status." "We do," Taehyun agreed with a smile. "But I think I'm beginning to understand Nocturnian perspectives better now." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Ja, who came to escort Taehyun to the High Council chamber where the formal recognition ceremony would take place. "Mother has summoned the entire planetary council," Jia said as they walked. "This is unprecedented. Usually only our hemisphere's representatives would attend." Taehyun's nerves returned. "The whole planet's leadership is coming to see me." "To see what you represent," Jia corrected. "No human has ever joined a ruling bloodline before. The implications are significant." The High Council chamber was different from the Grand Hall where Taehyun had faced his final trial. This room was circular, with a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time view of the stars above Nocturna Prime. 7 elevated seats formed a semicircle at one end. "The seats of the 7 major bloodlines," Jia explained. As Taehyun entered, he saw the chamber was already filled with Nocturnians of obvious importance. Their robes and markings identified them as leaders, advisors, and elders from across the planet. Many watched him with open curiosity. Ara waited near the center of the chamber, resplendent in ceremonial attire that marked her as heir to her bloodline. Her markings glowed with barely contained happiness when she saw him. Matriarch Neri occupied the central seat of the 7, her presence commanding respect from all present. The other 6 seats held Nocturnians of similar age and bearing, the leaders of the other major bloodlines, Taehyun guessed. A soft chime sounded, and the chamber fell silent. Matriarch Neri rose from her seat and approached the center where Taehyun and Era stood. "We gather today to witness something unprecedented," she began, her voice carrying easily through the chamber without apparent amplification. "The recognition of a human into a ruling bloodline of Nocturna Prime." She turned to address the assembled leaders directly. "Some have questioned this decision," she continued. "Some believe our bloodlines should remain pure. Others fear the influence of Earth and its expanding presence in the Galactic Alliance." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Clearly, not everyone approved of Taehyun's presence. "These concerns are not without merit," Neri acknowledged. "For centuries, we Nocturnians have kept ourselves separate, guarding our culture and our secrets. We have been misunderstood by many species, called Succubi by humans, thought to feed on emotions and life force." She paused, her violet eyes sweeping the chamber. The truth is more complex. We do not feed on emotions. We seek to learn emotions we have lost through our evolution. This statement caused a stir among the assembled leaders. Taehyun realized he was hearing something few outsiders had ever been told. Our ancestors, in their pursuit of emotional control and telepathic ability, engineered changes to our species. Nari continued. Each generation became more powerful at sensing and manipulating emotional energies, but at a cost. We began to lose our capacity to generate certain emotions ourselves. Joy, grief, hope, love. These became more difficult for pure bloodlines to experience without external stimulation. She turned to look directly at Taehyun. This is why some Nocturnians seek relationships with other species, not to feed on their emotions, but to relearn what we have lost, to experience through connection what we can no longer generate alone. The High Council chamber fell silent after Taehyun completed his final trial. Matriarch Neri approached, her expression unreadable as she stood before him in awe. This human has shown courage, adaptability, and emotional depth, she declared. He has passed our trials not through strength or cunning, but through understanding. He has seen the truth of our nature that we ourselves have been reluctant to acknowledge. She turned to the assembled council members, her markings pulsing with an intensity that commanded attention. For too long, we have hidden our weakness, pretending our emotional limitations were a sign of superiority. We have isolated ourselves from the very connections that might restore what we have lost. One of the other bloodline leaders stood. Matriarch Nari, you propose a dangerous path. Opening our society to outsiders risks our security, our traditions. Change always carries risk. Nari replied calmly. But stagnation guarantees extinction. Our birth rates have declined for 12 generations. Our youngest members show diminished telepathic abilities. We cannot continue as we have. She gestured to Taehyun and Era standing together. This bonding represents more than two individuals joining. It represents a new approach, one where we acknowledge our limitations and seek growth through connection rather than isolation. The council chamber erupted in discussion, markings flashing in complex patterns as Nocturnians debated among themselves. Taehyun couldn't follow all the nuances, but he understood this was a pivotal moment for their society. Finally, one by one, the leaders of the 6 other bloodlines rose from their seats. Each approached Taehyun and Ara, touching their foreheads in the traditional gesture of acceptance. When the last had returned to their seat, Matriarch Nari faced the couple again. She placed her hands on their joined ones, her markings glowing with formal intensity. The first human Nocturnian bond is recognized, Nari declared, her voice carrying the weight of official proclamation. And with it, a new chapter in galactic relations begins. Era's markings flashed with joy as she turned to Taehyun, her happiness radiating from her like physical light. Around them, the chamber filled with the pulsing glow of hundreds of Nocturnians acknowledging the historic moment. Later, as they left the chamber to join the festival celebrations in the palace grounds, Taehyun finally understood the full significance of what had happened. He hadn't just gained a partner, but had become part of history, a bridge between two species who needed each other more than either had realized. Your mother planned this all along, didn't she? He asked Ara as they walked through corridors lined with respectful Nocturnians. Era's markings pulsed with affection. Not exactly. She knew our bloodlines needed new connections, but she didn't expect you specifically. When I told her about our research together, about how you saw beyond the myths about our people, she became interested in meeting you. So your invitation to the festival wasn't just about us. It was always about us, Era assured him, squeezing his hand. But Mother saw potential for something greater. She has been fighting for changes in our approach to other species for decades. You gave her the example she needed. Outside, the festival was in full celebration. Nocturnians danced in patterns that made their markings create elaborate light displays against the twilight sky. Music unlike anything Taehyun had heard on Earth filled the air. Tones that seemed to resonate not just in his ears, but in his chest and mind as well. As news of the historic bonding spread through the celebration, many Nocturnians approached to touch foreheads with Taehyun and Era, offering congratulations and curious questions about Earth and humanity. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" Taehyun asked as they shared a moment alone on a quiet balcony overlooking the festivities. "For both our peoples," Era agreed. "The Galactic Alliance has been trying to establish deeper relations with Nocturna Prime for decades. Now they'll have their chance." "And us?" Taehyun asked. "What happens now?" Era's markings pulsed with warmth and promise. "Now we continue our research, but with the full resources of my bloodline behind us. We'll divide our time between Earth and Nocturna Prime, building bridges where none existed before." She touched her forehead to his, sharing the Nocturnian emotion that was closest to love, a complex blend of commitment, understanding, and hope that flowed between them like a current of light. "And perhaps," she whispered, "we'll discover things about both our species that neither of us could have found alone." Below them, the festival of bonding continued, its lights reflecting off the crystal cities floating above the bioluminescent forests of Nocturna Prime. A new era had begun, sparked by an unlikely connection between a human scientist and an alien princess who had seen beyond the myths to find truth in each other.